Hey people, how you doing? Welcome to the Sports Therapy Association podcast, episode 219, entitled Anatomy for Soft Tissue Therapists. What should we be learning? With my special guest coming out very shortly, James Earls. My name is Matt Phillips, creator of RunChatLive.com. And as always, this episode is being recorded live at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday evening. Although last week, those of you who did join us will remember that for episode 218, we did record it at 12 in the afternoon because, as we pointed out, not all of my guests are free to drop everything for me in the evening. For example, mothers with little ones to look after. And such was the case for my wonderful guest last week, Sonia Fierro, sports therapist, osteopath, and new co-host of the Women in Sports Therapy podcast and community. If you missed that episode, then it's available as always on popular podcast apps. And if you want to watch the video, which I always recommend, but then maybe that's just me, I like seeing who's speaking, then you can find that on YouTube and also on the STA website, 𝐻𝑒STA.co.uk. Sonia is going to be speaking at this year's Therapy Expo on day 1, November the 27th in the STA Theatre for a presentation entitled Women in Sports Therapy, Building a Stronger Community. And Sonia will be joined by WIST podcast co-hosts Gemma Pouzas and also Christian Bird, who is stepping in last minute. Thank you, Christian Bird, for Michelle Lyons. Christian is going to be a great talk. Christian is co-founder of Menopause Movement. And she will incidentally, like I say, have just finished delivering the opening session on day 1 in the STA Theatre with her presentation, Power the Pause, the Pelvic Floor and More. People listening now can write how I spelt that, power the pause, if you can see what's going on there. It's a great pun and alliteration. So if you are going to Therapy Expo and you work with female population, which I imagine applies kind of to everybody, then I would recommend going to the STA Theatre for the start of day 1, where you're going to get both of those fascinating talks. Right, enough. Back to tonight's episode. I'm going to bring you another fantastic educator who's going to be at Therapy Expo in literally 2 weeks now. We're talking the 27th and the 28th. So without further ado, I should bring up my guest for this episode, James Earls of Born to Move and Born to Walk. Hey, James, how are you?
Good evening. I'm very well, thank you, Matt. How are you?
I'm very well, and as always, you've been on the show numerous times now, and you're always very popular, both in person and on these podcasts. So I appreciate you giving up your time. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Nikki Mansfield. So if you are listening to the podcast and you're new, then thank you for joining us via the podcast. We do record this live, like I say, and if you want to join us live, then just head along normally at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday. And if you do, then you can bring up your questions for the guests or your comments, and also you get to flash your logo or your photo on the screen. Nikki Mansfield, for example, says, loving this Therapy Expo build up so far, giving us up for this year's pilgrimage. Pilgrimage, I like it. Where hands-on humans get hands-on for our annual Hug Fest. It's beautiful. That sums it up, Nikki. You've got a wonderful way for words. Yeah, that's great. Fantastic. Right. Steve Barr is here as well, saying good evening, talking to people with wonderful way with words. Steve Barr says, good evening. Fine people. Are we grand? Great. Thanks for joining us, Steve. John W. is here as well. Sarah Jones from the ST School is here as well. Thank you, people, for joining us. Really nice. I always love people joining us live. I appreciate there's plenty of other things you could be doing on your Tuesday evening. But we love doing this live. Don't we, James? There's something about live, isn't there?
It is. Yes. Special.
Very important. And this is obviously, you've been at Therapy Expo for quite a few years now. How do you feel about it? Is it different from other conferences you attend, or is it just another one for you to notch up on your calendar?
Very different from conferences. Much more, a lot more energy, a lot more buzz, a lot more noise. But most of that is
that a good thing?
It depends on my energy levels, but
okay.
Generally, it's a good thing because most people are having a good time and chatting and having fun, exchanging ideas, meeting each other. So it's certainly the busiest, the most energetic, the most interactive of all of the conferences. Most people tend to be a bit more academic and a bit dull, informative, but a bit dull.
That's fantastic. They'll have that. That'll chalk us up some brownie points with Therapy Expo. Interactive and not dull. Your mic is cutting out a little bit now. It wasn't when we were talking earlier on. I'm not sure which mic you're using. Just let me know if in the audience some of the words are cutting out, but we'll see how that goes. Right. So you've been, like I say, you've been on the show quite a few times, but we talked about this a little bit off air because I always worry about getting my guests to say who they are, where they're from, kind of like Cilla Black style. But you in particular, and also other guests, maybe we all are, without getting too deep, a product of your journey in life. But in particular, for people who don't know you, I think to understand where you're coming from when you talk, it's really useful to have, again, a look at your list of huge selling books. I can see by your smile that you're thinking, here we go again, back to 2000 and whenever it was 10.
You product of your journey is a very polite way of saying you're just a bit old.
I thought so. Yeah, I thought it was quite polite. That's how we roll, isn't it? Yeah. But it is, 14 years ago since the fascial release for structural balance. So again, I do get emails. In fact, this is what inspired me on, because when I last did this with you, people said, "Oh, it's so good to see the actual book covers when you were talking to James. It's really useful. Keep that going." So I was like, okay, you said that you wanted it. Here it is. So we'll bring them up and give you a chance to kind of talk about your journey. And if people know all about James already, which I think people in the room probably do, because you're kind of the fanboys giving up your Tuesday evening for us, which is great. But people who don't, then listen to the journey and you will understand Mr. James Earls. Let's bring something up here. Here we go. There you go. Where it all starts.
So that was, I think, around 2010. Well, maybe it was released, but work started in around 2009, 2010. I was working with Thomas Myers, co-author, down at the bottom. And I was responsible for teaching anatomy trainers through Europe. So I had trained in aromatherapy and then...
your mic's on again.
Oh, bugger.
That wasn't happening before when we were. I don't worry, I can edit this all out for the podcast, and there's plenty of stuff I can talk about. But is there another mic you can play around with? Maybe try without the earphones, I reckon. Yeah. In the meantime, people who are in the audience, just while James changes mic, which I'm sure he'll do very quickly, I think a few of you maybe have been along to James's either face-to-face or online courses and seen him at Therapy Expo. So maybe, because I can know the people who are here, if you have attended one of James's courses, then drop something in the comments just to let people who don't know James what to expect and why they're popular. I know why they're great. I know why they're popular. But I'd like to hear something from the horse's mouth, as it were. Back to James.
So is this working okay?
That's nice. Oh, yeah, very nice. It's giving it a little kind of deep tone as well. It's nice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Put everyone to sleep, just like in the workshops. So originally from Belfast, just south of Belfast, and aromatherapy, remedial techniques, reflexology, did the usual kind of, oh my God, what the hell am I going to do with my life? I add on all of these extra things. Early 90s, training was not of a very high level. So it was very much needed to just keep adding the weekend workshops and the short trainings. That was the only way to get a decent training. And then I came across Thomas Myers, and he was just releasing and working on the Anatomy Trains model. I met him even before the Anatomy Trains book came out, and he did a workshop in Dublin. And it was the first time I'd heard about fascia, and so I knew a bit about structural integration. And I went to the workshop, liked what he was saying, seemed to kind of tie in a lot of the ideas that kind of from holistic therapies that I had trained in. And so I signed up, trained with him, and then taught with him for probably about 10 years, 10, 12 years, never added it up. And then we realized we didn't have a handbook for the training, and that was the part of the driver for writing the fascial release for structural balance book. And that came out. So 2012, I was teaching, and then I was teaching, traveling around Europe, and eventually Gary Gray's name kept coming up in workshops. And I thought, I've no idea who the hell Gary Gray was, but I did a little bit of research and decided to then do an extra training in functional movement with Gary Gray. And that was also 2012. And that's when I started kind of expanding from a very fixed bodywork approach, people on the table, to broadening my repertoire to understanding much more about movement. and sort of incorporating movement and understanding of movement. And to help with that process, I decided to kind of combine some of Gary Gray's philosophy and thinking about joints and chain reaction mechanics, and some of what I'd studied with Tom and the myofascia, and bring those two worlds together by writing the next book was Born to Walk, which is looking at the mechanics.
Just going to interrupt a second, because that was quite, at the time, did you realize, because there were the fascia camp with anatomy trains, which still has a massive, two huge words, which people will still treat pretty much as a Bible still these days.
Yeah.
And then Gary Gray as well, huge name. Both of those groups were probably ahead of their time. I think you had the 𝐒𝐻𝐭𝐬 speech and the fuzz speech and all that. It was a big year around 212, 213.
Yep.
And then there's you, who's decided almost blasphemously to kind of mix the two. It's almost like an interracial kind of thing down south. Did you realize at the time that this was kind of frowned upon, or did you get that feedback that you were mixing or diluting each of them by mixing them, or was it just something you saw naturally as a necessity?
Initially not. So there was an excitement in both. The Gary Gray school were kind of excited to have me there, and there were other people that were kind of talking about fascia at the time as well. It wasn't just me. And they were coming across from the old school, kind of old school physiotherapy languaging of joints and bones and muscles. And I was excited by that because I did not have a good training in biomechanics and just in the mechanics. So that was exciting to me. And the anatomy trains myofascial world was coming from a very postural, stuck in kind of structure mode. So initially there was an excitement on both sides. And I was kind of in the middle and just linking the two, and kind of as a conduit almost. So I helped bring some of the myofascial excitement and understanding to the Gray Institute, and they're now doing quite a lot in that kind of that realm, and have brought that in and blended it into their system. And initially the anatomy train school were they were excited by kind of putting anatomy trends into a more functional vocabulary and a more functional vision. And initially that was an excitement. And then as I discovered, there was a little bit of friction, because it was almost separating the camp in the structural integration field within that school.
Yeah.
So there were those that were kind of the traditionalists, closer to the pure structure posture model, and those of us that wanted to kind of make it a little bit more real world.
Fine. No, I think it's just, I like to hammer that point home, because I'm sure it's a journey you did in 2014 and probably for years afterwards, where you realized you had to change and modify and evolve certain things which you'd probably been very fond of and admired. And then, because that's what therapists are having to do today when they're told, mass soft tissue therapists are told, actually, you're not actually doing this to the tissue, you're not actually doing, whatever it is. And that can be met with anger, disappointment. Some people even throw away their career, sadly, but you plowed on through.
I've changed and adapted. I also hit a crisis of confidence, whenever some of the big name critics kind of came out. It was like, and with some justification, but with some, I would say, very negative languaging and deliberately provocative languaging. I was hurt by it. Internally, it's just like, oh my God, I did have a kind of crisis of what the hell am I doing? What have I been doing with my career so far? And that has driven me to change much of my language and much of my understanding. I had a fantastic day last week with Anna Maria, and just walking up and down the beach of Exmouth and chatting about the newer thinkings and newer vocabularies and the research on how to blend essentially the old and new languaging around soft tissue work and manual therapy. And so that was fun. So so part of the conversation between the Gray Institute and anatomy trains that was going on in my head then led to the Born to Walk, was trying to kind of make an accessible text that brought those two worlds together, because in my career, I didn't have any resources that helped me understand or explain or work with movement. And and the gait cycle is kind of it's a very standard, almost an aspiration for most therapists. It's like I want to understand how to assess or how to view, verbalize, appreciate, how to see walking. And I think that's it's a useful starting point to build the vocabulary in order to understand movement. So that was my attempt in the first edition, Born to Walk, was blending some of the Gray Institute's mechanics along with the myofascial model of Myers and the anatomy twins.
And that was 2014. And now I'm interested because there was an updated version to the fascial release book, which I guess had a certain amount of evolution as well and a few changes in there. And
yeah, this came out after I extracted myself from the anatomy twins school, hence the reversal of the names. So the content, there was a previous revised edition.
Yep.
And this is like, well, it wasn't even previous. This is the same revised edition with a new front cover with the anatomy twins logo and the reversal of the names. In the revised edition, I put in a lot of functional assessment and functional body work to try and, in my mind, update it and bring it a little bit, give it a little bit more relevance. But as I extracted, the anatomy twins school wanted to kind of up their profile and stick their logo on it, and I was quite happy to have a reversal, because for me, a lot of the techniques are still valid, but a lot of the story, a lot of the vocabulary, and a lot of the explanation is kind of old school. So I'm content to be played second fiddle on the front cover.
It's very useful to know, because they're still looking at the forums and looking at the questions, maybe a little bit less, but there's still people who very much talking about anatomy trains, and I think it's still taught in a lot of courses as gospel, to explain and assessments. And all you're doing here is, I think, is helping listeners realize that, just because you're taught it by somebody who, rightfully so, you kind of herald as a little bit of a peer, and your tutor, it might be questionable. You might have to just sit back and criticize it a bit and think about it. So anyway, 2020 came along suddenly before we knew it, and that gave you a chance to put your new edition of Born to Walk, which had some major updates, did it?
Yeah, it was. So the first edition was pretty much organized around the anatomy twins lines, because that was my kind of, I was going to say my bread and butter, but it wasn't just the kind of mercenary aspect. It was what the language that I spoke every weekend in various forums, different workshops, but it was very much the vocabulary that I spoke. It was the lens or the filter through which I answered every question. And I realized this is it's not real. Why am I squeezing every question, the answer to every question into the anatomy twins model, when actually it's much more complex and much more interesting than just that. So Born to Walk was then second edition. Then is organized around the planes of motion. So it was just a different organizational tool.
Excellent. And you're still, are we looking at, does that need updating? You're still happy for people to read that and go, that's James Earls now, that is James Earls' version?
I think
another one coming out
of a kind of textbook style would say, as soon as it's published, it's out of date.
Yes, it's true.
Which is why we can go to the primary sources of the research papers, but the research papers are not very accessible, and they're also not easy to read, and also they tend to be so focused on certain aspects. So yes, of course, there are things I would like to update, but I'm much happier and much more content with that version. And a third edition is not coming anytime soon.
That's fine. That's okay. But then there's no need for third edition, because that kind of opened the door to all sorts of different things. You also had Understanding the Human Foot, which I believe was the year after.
Yep.
What inspired you to spend time on producing that?
Lockdown, and it was the 3 months of lockdown that we were going to have at the beginning. I thought 3 months with nothing to do other than write the book I want to write, was the functional anatomy of the full human body. And so after 2 years of lockdown, I managed to get as far as the foot. So it was, I think I began with the foot because it was just, I thought, if you do understand the foot, if you understand the principles of functional movement, the foot is a wonderful place to start exploring those principles. And once you understand those principles, then it's easy to kind of jump and apply them to almost everywhere else in the body. So it's about seeing and understanding the form and the function. And if we can understand the form and function, well, that's it. From the foot, you just apply the same thinking, the same principles to the shoulder complex or to the spine. It's kind of just, take that bit, repeat for every other section, if we were to talk about sections, but preferably not.
Which is great, because that's kind of leading into what this whole episode and what you're going to be doing at Therapy Expo is about. And then, because this then helped you address the next one, which is still an illustrated guide, but this was now functional anatomy of movement.
Yep.
Okay, so now we're jumping from the foot to putting everything together. And that was your most recent book, which was, what are we talking about now? Last year?
2 years ago, I think.
2 years ago. 2 years ago now. Time flies. Yeah, 23.
Yeah.
And is this, so this kind of brings us into the topic, is this getting close to how you think anatomy should be taught as opposed to how traditionally it has been taught?
Pretty much, yes. There's a lot in there, and kind of probably over that and the Born to Walk and the Foot book. I believe anatomy is better taught with explanations rather than the rote memorization that we tend to suffer through. So I was spent some time this afternoon kind of thinking about, okay, so where do we go with this? What's the title? Are we taught the anatomy that we need? So I would kind of reverse that question. What are we teaching anatomy for? What's the desired result through the teaching of anatomy? Why are we teaching it? And I think many schools, without knowing it or teaching it because it has to be taught, because we have to know where we're sticking our thumb into, or whatever area that we're working on. But I think it should be much more than that. I think as a soft tissue therapist of whatever form, I think we should understand how the body moves in real life. Our clients are coming to us in most cases to improve their performance in real life, whether that be in their hobby, their sport, their sitting, their work, their home life, something. And I don't think the clinical anatomy that we tend to suffer through doesn't prepare us for that understanding. It doesn't give us the vocabulary.
So if I'm going to play devil's advocate here,
Please
for
do.
the kind of, especially for people out there who are delivering courses and feel the need now to defend it. So isn't the idea that first of all, we learn the muscles, the origin, the insertion, to help us understand what's going to happen when the muscle shortens or lengthens? Yep. And then once we've got that map, we're past that little bit of the test and how muscles work and sliding filament theory and all that stuff, then that helps understand movement? Or are you saying that isn't necessarily a good follow-on?
I would conjure that with, I think it gets in the way. I think it inhibits a lot of the vision that we need to understand movement. And I think that we've fallen into the trap of teaching the anatomy because we have really good tools to teach the anatomy from. It's like we've got fantastic texts because it's so easy to present the picture of the bicep, the picture of the hamstring. So easy to list out the very precise attachments and replicate the actions. But that's not how the hamstrings work, or it's not how the biceps work. So I think for me, I make this argument for many topics that we start in the wrong place, and we travel in the wrong direction. We're trying to understand human movement and the complexity of human movement by starting looking at the bits, with the aspiration that if we keep adding the bits and collect all of the Tom Marshall, if we know that 640 whatever muscles, somehow we miraculously understand movement, so it doesn't work. Because there's so much missing from the clinical anatomy story. It only gives us a certain vocabulary. And to me, I was thinking earlier, it's like one of the topics or one of the subjects I loved in school, one of the few, was geography. It's like, what's the difference in geography? Physical geography, there, you look at a mountain, you go, oh, look, there's a big, can you see the big circular scoop that's kind of being driven out of the side of the mountain? You go, yeah, I can see that. It's like, do you know why that's there? It's like, no bloody clue. It's like, oh, it's not because somebody came along and dug it out. It's because of the glaciers and because of glacial action. And so you start, physical geography starts with something that you can observe. It's like, I can see that. And then I have the question, why? And then I can go down into the detail because I know where I'm trying to get to. I'm trying to understand how that thing was there. And so by going top down, I get I start from something that I can see and something I can recognize, as opposed to, it's like day one anatomy class. Okay, well, this is a bone, and let's look at the, I don't know, femur, whatever it is. This is the greater trochanter and the lesser trochanter and the bone, blah blah blah. All the rest of it, like, okay, and it's like, well, rather than that, let's look at how you use your lower limb. It's like, what do you do with your lower limb? How does it work? What kind of movement does it make? What's the difference between your thigh and your foot? It's like, never thought about that. Well, what do they do? Why do you think your foot is made up of 24 bones and 33 joints and everything else that people kind of go on about? It's like, what's the role of those bones and what's the role of those joints? And then how do we control those movements? So if I start from the familiar, I can work down to the detail, to the less familiar. Because what properties do those things, why do we have a femur? Why do we have one big long bone and then two littler bones, but one really chunky one and one outlier? And then we got this random collection of rubble at the bottom. It's like, why are they there? And then I can start kind of questioning, is like, well, let's look at the shape that they have. Let's look at what they do. Let's look at how your foot responds in movement. We can talk about pronation and supination. So we can start from the big movement pictures and then go down into the detail. It's like, well, you pronate and you supinate because something. It's like you've got a hugely adaptable foot because, well, it has to do a lot of jobs. Whereas your thigh, it's really just about stabilizing, and we could talk about leverage. We could talk about the knee joint and its alignment. We could then talk about the alignment between each of the joints. We could look at walking. It's like, just take a step. It's like, I know walking. I know about taking a step. It's like, well, now I can talk about the communication between the joints. So we can do it that way. There's so many other ways in which we can approach anatomy. I think we've got stuck in this topographical, just learn the map. If you don't teach geography by just saying, okay, day one, let's look at the map of England. It's like, and well, can you see the Pennines? It's like, no. It's like, because I don't know anything about contour lines. I don't know the rules of mapping. Well, let's go out and look at some of the area outside the school, whatever. Let's look at that. Let's look at the context, and then let's look at how the map kind of represents that. That's how we would start map reading. But yet in anatomy class, we almost too often, we kind of ignore the body and just like, okay, let's look at the pictures. So for me, it doesn't make sense now. It used to, because I fell into the trap of doing what everyone else did because everyone else did it, so it must be right. It's like it doesn't give us as a flexible understanding of anatomy by the end. It gets us fixed into, and I see this a lot with people coming to the workshops. They believe that the hamstrings will only do A, B, and C. It's like, well, you know that they can also extend the knee in closed chain. It's like, well, what's closed chain? What's the difference between closed chain and open chain? You know that, okay, yeah, they rotate the knee whenever it's flexed. It's like, yeah, but they also rotate the hip. They also involve with ab and adduction of the hip. It's like, but the anatomy books never told me that. It's like, yeah, but that's because you don't know the rules of the anatomical position. You don't know the rules of the way in which clinical anatomy is kind of presented. So it's simple things like that. With the many of us teaching clinical anatomy don't know the box that is clinical anatomy. It's limiting of its own accord. It has those definitions, and then we don't make that overt to the students, because, well, often, and in my case, I wasn't taught the principles of clinical anatomy because my teacher didn't know the principles of anatomy, because their teacher didn't know the principles of clinical anatomy. They didn't know the vocabulary. Whereas if you start blending, there are lots of richnesses in the topographical clinical anatomy, but if you blend that with functional anatomy, with evolutionary anatomy, with comparative anatomy, with developmental anatomy, all of these other different vocabularies, we start getting a better picture of why. It's like, for me, I learn better when I'm told a story. I don't learn, the qualities of the hamstrings. It's like they attach their end there and do A, B, and C. It's like, okay, I'll try to remember that for the next 3 weeks until there's the exam, and then I'll forget. But if I'm told a story, or if I'm feeling it, and it starts to make a little bit more sense. It's easier to learn if I've got a story, and the stories come from not the clinical anatomy, because there's no story. It comes from, so, well, those things are there because of how we developed, because of how we evolved, and we move in different ways. So we can explore all of those different avenues and different vocabularies, and suddenly it's like, oh, my picture, my world gets bigger, and I get a much more adaptable approach to interpreting the stories that my clients tell me.
And I guess I'm thinking, the knock-on effect to how you work with your patient or client then is huge as well, because the traditional way is somebody comes in, they hurt their knee, and you just look at the knee and you think, oh, that does that. I'm going to do this because it's going to make it more extensible. Or I'm going to do this because it's going to do that. And you're not looking at the story at all. You're not looking at the patient and everything else and all the other factors. So it's not surprising that if we're taught this form of anatomy, then our way of thinking of how to help people in pain is quite limited as well.
Becomes isolated, becomes focused, and also our techniques. It's like, the muscle energy technique, the passive stretches, they're all almost copy and paste from clinical anatomy. It's like, oh, okay, so the pectoralis major does this, so therefore, in order to give it a stretch and apply MET, we put it in that position. It's like, but it's much more adaptable than that. It has many more potentials of direction, many different potentials of reacting to other parts of the body.
And I guess when we assess, like we're proudly taught on traditional courses, do it, and then I love the idea of a touch without intention is a wasted touch or something. But if your intention is only to make this go from A to B, and then you test it and it has gone from A to B, well done, you've made that go from A to B. But how does that relate to the person's movement in real life? So you're getting success, but for a reason which is not really very valuable. Very interesting.
I'm not going to kind of attack orthopedic assessment. There's wonderful richnesses and specificity-ish in most orthopedic assessments. There's a lot of criticism of orthopedic assessments, but they're still quite useful and can all be improved. they're reducing the variables,
Yeah.
but they're also limiting my scope, my understanding. It's easy to go from clinical anatomy to orthopedic assessment to textbook standard applied MET or stretches, whether they be passive or active. And that's a nice consistency across the literature, but it's totally different as soon as you get outside. It's why, I don't know about your experience in teaching and running gait analysis, but my experience that many people turn up and they don't know where to begin because of the blinkers almost that clinical anatomy gives us.
It's very interesting. There's been some chatter in the people who joined us live. Thank you very much. Okay, I'll bring James back shortly. Just disappeared from the screen. I'm sure he'll be back soon. I'm wondering, Stevie, you said earlier, which was a good question, because the word functional annoyed me quite a lot about, I don't know, it's probably around 10 years ago or something, because suddenly everyone was doing functional, which normally involved juggling on a fitball whilst, closing one eye and then just breathing out 10 times or something. It was like, after hearing, I'm wondering, this is a question for you, Stevie Barr. I'm wondering if after hearing James talk now, it makes more sense why he's calling it functional. Yes, come back to me on that. Imi Tester, you have come up with, before James even mentioned maps, Imi, you're amazing. You kind of said the map is not the terrain. So you already started comparing, as James did, to the idea of the map and it not giving us as much information as we thought, useful information anyway. And then Stevie came back afterwards with some nice vocalizing there: flexible anatomy, adaptable anatomy. You love your words, don't you, Stevie? You do love a good word. Right, so James has disappeared for the moment, but I shall take this moment until he returns to let you know about when he is going to be at Therapy Expo. Oh, look, he's back already. I'll let him come up first. There we go. Sorry, James, we lost you for a while.
I don't know why or what happened.
Don't worry. Nobody said anything bad about you while you were gone, and I was very complimentary, and it was fine. But we were going to jump into. Yep. I asked Steve a good question, actually. I'm hoping Stephen Barr is going to come back to me, because earlier on at 2027, which was 13 minutes ago, he said, "My only question is why the need for the word functional." Now, for me personally, I remember when I didn't like the word functional, because there was a lot of gurus out there who were proclaiming anything. I just said quite callously, functional normally meant standing on a fitball whilst juggling, closing one eye, and something like that. And the word became a little bit, another kind of like catchphrase thing. But now I've asked Steve whether, now he's heard you, what other word could you use in functional? Because you are kind of, I mean, it's a good use of the word, really.
I'm with you, Stephen. Why do we need the word functional? I defend my use of functional and get frustrated by the overuse of functional. To me, functional anatomy is the anatomy that it can describe with reasonable accuracy normal everyday function. So as opposed to the kind of the functional training or the functional exercises, which I think partly kind of probably came out of the Gary Gray school and many other schools of functional training, which was just trying to bring in as much kind of application of three-dimensional movement and try to get away from single muscle kind of isolated muscle strengthening exercises, gym-based exercises. So the functional, for me, functional movement and functional exercise, I struggle with, because I don't think that's a correct use of functional. To me, my defense of functional movement would be if I have assessed a client and think that they could improve their something. So thoracic mobility is the kind of a classic. And if I kind of suggest some exercises, some mobility, some whatever to that client for their homework or for the to put into their exercise routine, I would classify that is functional exercise, functional movement, because of my understanding of functional anatomy. Whereas if I'm just going, okay, so your 𝐶𝐻 exercise, and there's an example in the book, your 𝐶𝐻 exercise was commonly attacked because it's not a functional strengthener of the glutes, because it's not kind of working in this eccentric kind of functional position. It's just a concentric strengthener. I was like, to me, that's a perfectly functional exercise. If somebody really needs to start from almost scratch to strengthen their glutes, it's a very safe position. And my understanding of it would be that's a functional exercise if I need to gradually build up. So any exercise to me can be functional if I have deliberately, I'm trying to avoid using the word prescribed, advised that exercise could hopefully, in your case, improve your function, as opposed to just the random. It's like, okay, so I think, yeah, you've got weak glutes because that's an epidemic at the moment. Is the trendy story of the moment. So I'm going to give you a functional exercise that will strengthen your glutes. It's like, well, that's not functional if I haven't given it to that client for their specific need as I see it. Then, so yes, I would agree. Our view of function is like, yeah, there's a bias in everything, but there's a reason they're coming to us, and they're coming to us because of our hopefully informed and trained bias. Mm-hmm. That I'm going to suggest something according to my bias. And that's the reality of being a therapist. I think we have to own that.
It's very good. It's a great question, Steve. I was celebrating 𝐸𝐵 because before you even mentioned maps, 𝐸𝐸 came up with a map is not the terrain, which was exactly what you were talking about. I did love your analogy of geography. I thought it was great as well, how we learned geography typically like that. We were able to appreciate the mountain, maybe, the valley where the glacier once went. And then later it makes sense when we learn about an oxbow lake or something. And it's great. Whereas anatomy, totally flip it around. Yeah, it's good. Yeah. Good stuff. Well done, James Earls. As me congratulating James Earls for being a good educator. Does it get more patronizing? Not really. Right. So let's have a look. What we're going to do is we're going to have a look now at people what you can be doing at Therapy Expo. I think we've given people enough reason now to go, oh, that's true. I need a bit more James in my life. So we start off day one is when you are in theatre, where are we? Theatre B, I think it is. Yeah, Theatre B, 10:20 in the morning. And that's where you've got soft tissue therapists. Are we taught the anatomy we need? So that will give people a great chance to listen to you about things we've talked about tonight, and also come up with a few alternatives like we have. The exciting thing for us, obviously, is that later on after that talk, and we've mentioned this before, the STA Theatre this year is very much providing a chance for the speakers from the other big theatres to come and have a little bit more of an intimate gathering with people sitting around a circle and kind of get a bit more hands-on maybe. And that's exactly what we're doing with James, which will be 1:45 on day one. And that will be based, they won't have to have gone to your talk. It might be useful if they have, it'll be an extension of it, but it'll be a Q&A on basically what we're talking about tonight. And the questions really helped in there. We've talked about this a lot, but as an educator, the best way you can help people is by having them give you questions.
Yeah. It helps me know what we need to know, is like, and what we want to know, and where the black holes are. So yeah, it's much easier to play jazz when you're given something.
Oh, beautiful, what a reference. And I guess as well that as well as an educator, that the amount of information that's going to be retained by people in a Q&A environment, depending on what their goal is, but it's probably they're going to remember more of that possibly than sitting in a big kind of traditional theatre with somebody talking at them for 25 minutes. Not to put that down, but reflection's really where it all kind of comes into play, isn't it?
Yeah, because it comes back to the why. It's not, giving a 30 minute kind of presentation was really 25 minutes. It's just, okay, I will give to you what I think maybe you want to hear, but really it's just what I want to say. Whereas in the Q&A, it's like, okay, you get the opportunity to voice your need. what confusion or frustration, as I think Stephen had a frustration rather than a question, and we share that, and we can explore it, and it's much more personal, much more approachable, understandable, relatable, and memorable. So
Of course, I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, your Q&A is definitely going to be that. But for some educators who are used to just giving information and kind of standing on a bit of a pedestal, when it comes to Q&A, it's more tricky if they're not used to that environment, because you might get caught on your toes a little bit. You're quite happy to receive questions because you encourage people to ask questions. But I'm not bad mouthing anybody else. I'm just thinking the traditional educator might find a Q&A of being put on the spot a little bit more tricky.
I can totally understand that's true, and it is absolutely, it's true for me. I'm not the world's quickest thinker, and I'm not the world's most extrovert person. So being put on the stage with a bloody microphone in front of a crowd of people in a huge auditorium, it's you won't necessarily see me at my best or most creative, but I will certainly do my best.
And we've also got the speakers lounge, which I'm sure you'll be delighted with, where you can stand and just have people run towards you and fire whatever they like at you. So you'll be hanging around there most of the day, I imagine.
That sounds like custard pies.
We've got stocks and everything just waiting. Wonderful. Now, obviously, the most important part of the evening, we should mention that you're also on day 2 in the Hands-On Hub, because we know what would happen to us if we didn't mention that. A certain Anna-Maria Mazzieri would be hanging our entrails up around the Hands-On Hub for a display. Yes, you're going to be on day 2, which is really exciting as well. I probably won't be able to get along to hear it, but I'm looking forward to what people say about it. It's at 10:10 in the morning at the Hands-On Hub, and that's going to be, it's called The Shoulder, Integrating Touch with Functional Anatomy for a Modern Approach to Shoulder Mobility. And I think that's really useful, because everything people have picked up maybe and learned, they can now apply to a particular joint.
Yep. So yeah, we're going to be exploring how to use movement to mobilize clients' movement, as opposed to us doing kind of the standard protocols of the passive mobilizations, and also being creative in thinking what else moves the shoulder, as opposed to me moving my shoulder. Then, but on my right arm moving my right shoulder, I can have my left arm mobilizing the shoulder, I can have my head mobilizing the shoulder, I can have either lower limb mobilizing the shoulder, I have my breath mobilizing the shoulder. We got so many other potentials, which are much more, for many people in many situations, applicable to their function, because it's not, we don't always move the right shoulder to move the right shoulder.
It's gonna be great. I'm already getting, not fear of missing out. I know I'm going to be missing out because I'm going to be stuck in the STA with amazing other guests, but that's fine. That's okay. It's not about me, Therapy Expo. I can deal with that. No, great. It'd be a wonderful opportunity for people to come and see you. Where are we? Oh, 9 minutes to go. And also, if people are wanting to see if they can't make Therapy Expo, I have to remember, I mean, this is great building up to Therapy Expo. Some people can't get there, or maybe they have to work, they can't get time off, which is always a shame. So I'm sorry if we have been just talking about Therapy Expo, everybody, but there are other ways to see you. And there's a particular one coming up again with Anna-Maria at the ST School next. I'm sure you've got other things going on, but that's kind of like, again, your kind of bread and butter about functional body work and people getting to know what you're about. Tell us a little bit about what that is. A part of a series, isn't it? Of different exercises. This is the standing one.
It's the standing, yeah. So functional bodywork is I teach over two weekends, one standing. So it's kind of exploring the pluripotentiality of tissues, and how the reality of how we move, how we can apply bodywork in ways that can make functional sense for the client. It's not necessarily kind of first treatment kind of work. It can be very informative for assessment and getting the feel of clients in the early parts of the session, or early parts of the therapeutic relationship. Excellent for skill building and for relationship building, because the client feels heard. Because we teach ways in which we can put them into safe, comfortable positions and watch how the whole system responds whenever they make a certain movement. And it's building up the skills to have the vocabulary to be able to palpate, investigate, and hopefully, well, obviously improve their trust to make certain movements. And the first weekend, it's not necessarily an order, but the first weekend is coming up with Anna Maria is in standing. So how to access pretty much all of the major muscle areas of the body, and being creative with how we can work with them in a soft tissue manual therapy kind of fashion. So it's a way of, for me, teaching manual therapy, but also for me, the more important teaching aspect is feeling the reality of how the body responds to movement. Mm-hmm. So it's a 2-day functional, sorry, Stephen, for using that bad word again, the F word again, is coming back to the reality of functional anatomy. It's like, well, you get to feel what happens in your subtalar joint whenever you take your arm up and over your head, what happens in your knee whenever you make certain movements, with your shoulder, your eyes, your head, anything. So you can actually feel the response in real time with a real person.
I think that'd be really exciting because again, a lot of therapists, and hopefully you'll have plenty on the course, who have come from a traditionally taught soft tissue therapy course, whether it's sports massage, and they haven't really been given anything which has involved assessing the client off the couch. A lot of it is lie down on the couch, lie down, let's check the range of motion here. And so we've already talked about, maybe you're not getting as much information as you can do. And also the client isn't experiencing the sensations which they really need to experience in order to help them through that pain problem they're having. So wonderful experience to get people off the couch and not have that fear of, oh my God, what do I do? They're standing up. I'm no longer in control. But you are. You should never really be in control anyway. You're facilitating, aren't you? So great opportunity. Very exciting, because it is a struggle, and we touched on it earlier on, of crisis moments and self-doubt and that. But I think one of the things I love about you and a lot of my guests is you recognize that you've been through that, so you understand what it's like to have your beliefs and things you've either paid loads of money for, invested a lot of your time into, to be challenged. And it's very rarely a case of throwing everything away, isn't it? It's just
there are elements of truth in all the stories that any kind of therapeutic story that's survived for some years. There's obviously some grain of truth and usefulness in it. All of the vocabularies that I've learned, all of the skills that I've learned over the years, they're still in the tool bag, as many people talk about. They can come out. There is a certain vision with anatomy trains that we can talk about the reality or not of the communication of force, but we can still see a line of strain that goes through the body in certain movements in that direction. So everything has a potential reuse. We still go back to the old albums in 1972, and there's still a wonderful freshness in there. They still have something to give us. So
very definitely. I think it's great for people who are listening to hear that, because it is normally met with fear. When you hear someone's rocking your boat a bit, it's fear, and then maybe anger, and then dismiss it. And that's one of the biggest barriers, unfortunately. But it's up to us and the teacher to bring that down. Great. Okay. Well, look at it. It's 4 minutes to 9. So, if people, anything else coming up, you'd like to give a shout out to? What else apart from Therapy Expo and Anna Maria? I think that's everything, isn't it?
I'm pretty much after that. I'm off I'm teaching in Thailand, so if anyone wants to come to Thailand,
just give a shout out. We did that last time, I think. Where in Thailand is it?
Bangkok.
Okay, lovely. So if we've got anybody from Bangkok joining us tonight, you're going to be over in Bangkok. When's that?
That is from January 16th, 17th, and I'm teaching understanding anatomy of movement, born to walk, and both functional bodywork workshops. So it's a full-on 7-day teaching trip.
Amazing. Right, for people who want to follow and connect with you, James Earls, Instagram.
So Instagram, so Instagram at _born to move, or at born_to_walk, or the website, it's old fashioned, the website borntomove.com.
Fantastic. And Facebook, you quite active on that still, or?
Not really.
Not as much. Okay, that's fine. I understand.
Yeah.
I commend that. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
Facebook.
But still, Born to Move on Facebook.
Okay. Right, we'll put all those notes and links on the show notes as always. So thank you very much, James, for giving up another hour.
you.
Fantastic to
My pleasure.
talk to you. Look at that, you even